The skies above Arendor were a murky sea of swirling mists, where the light of distant stars barely pierced the heavy atmosphere. The planet's surface was a world of contrasts. Towering ancient forests stretched toward the heavens, their branches twisted and gnarled like the hands of forgotten gods, while beneath them, the deep oceans churned in restless shades of sapphire and indigo. This was a world shrouded in mystery, where every shadow seemed alive, where every breeze carried whispers of things unseen. Amid this misty wilderness, in the heart of one of Arendor's grim and bustling cities, a young girl named Mara wandered the streets. She was an Ilhari, a fragile, almost ethereal species known for their translucent skin that shimmered faintly in the light. Her veins pulsed with a soft luminescence, making her appear like a being woven from the threads of the stars themselves. She was small, even for her kind, her slight frame giving her an air of delicate vulnerability that belied the storm of emotions within her. Mara moved through the city like a ghost, her large, glowing eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sorrow. Those eyes, mirrors of the skies above, had once been filled with wonder, the curiosity of a child whose world stretched far beyond the towering buildings and narrow streets. But now they were clouded, dulled by the weight of loss and abandonment. Her parents, esteemed explorers who had charted the distant corners of the galaxy, had perished in the vastness of space, lost to the treacherous asteroid belt that encircled Arendor. Their ship, the Zephyr, had been a marvel of engineering, designed to withstand the dangers of space travel. But even the best technology could not guard against the unpredictability of the cosmos. A single navigation error a fraction of a degree too close to the asteroid field, and they were gone. Only Mara, shielded within an emergency pod, had survived the catastrophe. She had been just 8 years old. That was 2 years ago. 2 long, agonizing years of wandering through a world that no longer felt like home. Mara had been sent to live with distant relatives, but they had no love for her. To them she was a burden, a reminder of her parents' reckless pursuit of adventure, of the lives lost in that ill-fated voyage. The day they sent her to the children's home in the heart of the city, Mara had cried for the last time. She promised herself she wouldn't cry again, no matter how harsh the world became. And the world had indeed been harsh. The children's home was a cold, sterile place where the caretakers cared little for the well-being of the orphans under their charge. The other children were no better, hardened by years of neglect and cruelty. Mara, with her quiet demeanor and fragile appearance, had been an easy target. But she learned quickly. She learned how to hide, how to blend into the shadows, how to avoid the worst of the abuse. Until one day she couldn't take it anymore. It was a rainy evening when Mara made her escape. The city was drowning in mist, the rain falling in thick sheets that blurred the edges of reality. She had slipped out through a broken window, her small body easily squeezing through the narrow gap. No one had noticed her disappearance, not then, and not in the days that followed. Now Mara wandered the streets alone, a ghost among the living. She had no home, no family, no future. The city was a maze of towering structures and narrow alleys, the buildings old and crumbling, their facades streaked with grime. The air was thick with the smell of wet stone and the acrid tang of smoke from the factories that loomed in the distance. The people who lived here were as rough as the city itself, gruff merchants, weary travelers, and the occasional gang of thieves that prowled the streets in search of easy prey. But Mara had learned to navigate this world. She knew which streets to avoid, which shopkeepers were kind enough to give her scraps of food, and which corners offered shelter from the biting winds that howled through the city at night. She slept beneath the awnings of crumbling buildings, her slender body curled up to keep warm. Each night she would watch the stars disappear behind the mist, wondering if her parents were out there, somewhere, in the cold vastness of space. It was during one of these nights, as the mist rolled thick through the streets, that Mara's life would change once again. She was sitting beneath the awning of an old, abandoned shop, huddled in a thin blanket she had scavenged from a trash heap. The rain had finally stopped, but the air was still heavy with moisture. Her eyes, glowing softly in the dim light, scanned the empty street in front of her, searching for any sign of danger. She had become accustomed to the quiet, the way the city seemed to hold its breath after the rain. But tonight the quiet was different. There was a tension in the air, a subtle shift that made her skin prickle. That was when she saw them. A group of children, older than her by a few years, emerged from the mist like shadows. Their leader was a tall boy with a lean, predatory grace, his eyes cold and calculating. His name was Drays, and Mara had seen him before. He was the leader of one of the street gangs that roamed this part of the city, a group of thieves and pickpockets who preyed on the weak and the desperate. Mara's heart quickened as she realized they had been watching her. Drays' gaze locked onto hers, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. He stepped forward, his gang following close behind, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "You're a quiet one, aren't you?" Drays' voice was smooth, almost friendly, but there was a hardness beneath it. "Been watching you for a while now. You've got good instincts, staying out of sight like that." Mara didn't respond. Her body tensed, ready to run, but she knew it would be useless. Drays was fast, faster than anyone she had ever seen. She had heard stories about him, how he could outrun even the most seasoned city guards, how he always knew where to strike and when to disappear. He crouched down in front of her, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "What's your name?" Still, Mara said nothing. She could feel the weight of the other children's stares, their silent threat pressing in on her from all sides. Drays reached out and gently touched a strand of her silver hair, his smile never faltering. "You've got a look about you," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "like you don't belong here. But you know what? You're in luck. I can help you. Give you a place to stay, a family even. All you have to do is work for me." Mara's hands trembled in her lap. She didn't want to steal. She didn't want to be part of Drays' gang. But what choice did she have? The city was unforgiving to those who wandered its streets alone, and she was so tired of being alone. Slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. Drays' smile widened, and he stood, motioning for her to follow. "Good choice. You won't regret it." But as Mara rose to her feet, her heart heavy with fear, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a terrible mistake. Life with Drays' gang was a blur of shadows and stolen moments. Mara quickly fell into her new role, her natural agility and ability to go unnoticed making her an invaluable asset to the gang. Drays taught her how to pick locks, how to slip into buildings undetected, how to lift credits and valuables without anyone noticing. She hated every moment of it, but she had no choice. This was survival. The city became her playground, its labyrinthine streets and crumbling buildings offering endless opportunities for theft. She moved like a wisp of mist through the alleys, her footsteps silent, her heart pounding in her chest with each new heist. The fear of getting caught was always there, lurking in the back of her mind, but there was also a strange thrill that came with it, a sense of power she hadn't known before. But that power was nothing compared to what she discovered one fateful night. It was a simple job, or at least it was supposed to be. Drays had sent her to steal from a merchant's stall in the marketplace, a routine task she had done dozens of times before. The market was crowded, the air thick with the scent of roasting meats and spices. Mara slipped through the throngs of people, her fingers deftly plucking coins and trinkets from the unsuspecting. The city of Arendor was a labyrinth of stone and metal, where towering structures reached upward, as if trying to claw their way out of the perpetual mist that cloaked the streets. It was a place where the weak learned quickly to survive, or they were swallowed whole by the darkness that lurked in every alley. Mara, now part of Drays' gang, had begun to understand that survival often meant compromise, and she had compromised more than she ever thought she would. Drays' gang wasn't like the others in the city. They were sharper, more coordinated, led with the cunning of their young leader, Drays, who operated with an intelligence that belied his age. While other groups fought for scraps, Drays' gang thrived, targeting high-value merchants, stealing from wealthier districts, and moving through the city with precision. Drays kept his family, as he called them, close. But Mara knew better. They weren't a family. They were tools, weapons, pawns in Drays' endless pursuit of power. Mara's role in the gang was unlike that of the other children. With her small frame and ability to slip into places unnoticed, Drays assigned her to more delicate tasks. Her natural agility made her perfect for picking locks, sneaking into merchant stalls and even homes to retrieve valuable items. But the more Mara stole, the more she felt the weight of what she was doing, the growing sense that she was falling into a pit she could never climb out of. She had never wanted this life, but like a bird in a gilded cage, Drays kept her trapped with promises of protection and veiled threats of what would happen if she ever left. The gang slept in an abandoned warehouse near the industrial district, a decaying, forgotten structure that smelled of rust and damp concrete. It was cold and bleak, but to the others it was a haven. To Mara, it was a prison. Every night, the city's sounds faded into the background, a distant hum of machinery and voices, occasionally punctuated by the sharp cry of a city dweller in trouble. The night air was thick, oppressive, and the darkness pressed down on everything like a living entity. Mara lay on a thin mat on the cold warehouse floor, her eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling above her, unable to sleep. Her mind buzzed with thoughts of her parents, of the life she had once known, and now of her newfound abilities. She couldn't stop thinking about that night in the market, when she had phased out of the merchant's grasp, reappearing outside his stall, as if time itself had bent around her. It had felt so instinctual, so natural, and yet terrifying. The legends of her people spoke of the Ilhari's connection to the stars, of ancient powers that could shift reality, but those were bedtime stories, myths, and yet, it had happened. She had felt it. Mara had kept this secret to herself, not daring to tell Draze or anyone in the gang. She knew instinctively that if Draze found out, he would exploit her powers, twist them into something darker. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. But she couldn't deny that her abilities had saved her, and she began to wonder if they could also free her. The gilded cage tightens. Days turned into weeks, and Mara's skills as a thief grew sharper. Draze praised her often, his cold eyes gleaming with satisfaction whenever she returned with more than expected. But with every bit of praise, Mara felt the invisible chains around her tighten. She was valuable to him now more than the others, and she knew it. The way he looked at her, the way he positioned her for the riskiest jobs, it wasn't trust. It was control. Draze had a way of getting inside your head, of making you feel like you owed him everything. He spoke to the gang with an easy charm, calling them his family, giving them what they needed: food, shelter, protection from other gangs. But underneath that smooth exterior was something darker, something predatory. Mara saw it in the way he watched people, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. She saw it in the way he dealt with those who crossed him. One day, after a particularly successful heist at a jewelry stall, Mara returned to the warehouse with a satchel full of glittering gemstones. The job had been risky, she had nearly been caught. The shopkeeper had been suspicious, and Mara had been forced to use her phasing ability once more to slip through a wall and escape. Her heart had pounded as she flickered through the physical plane, the sensation leaving her both exhilarated and terrified. When she handed the satchel to Draze, his eyes lit up with greed. He rummaged through the jewels, holding them up to the faint light of the warehouse, their facets catching the dim glow. "You're getting good at this," Mara Draze said, his voice dripping with approval. He tossed one of the gems back into the bag and gave her a look that made her stomach twist. "Really good." Mara forced a smile, but her hands were trembling. She hated the way he looked at her, as if she were a tool, a weapon he was sharpening for some larger purpose. Draze leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You've got a gift, you know that," he said softly. "I've never seen anyone as quick as you. You're special." Mara's heart pounded in her chest, her mouth dry. She wasn't sure if he knew about her powers, but his words felt like a trap, like he was trying to coax something out of her. "Special how?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Draze's smile was slow, calculated. "You've got instincts, you can disappear, slip through places even I can't go. And you're getting better every day." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But you're holding back, aren't you?" Mara's blood ran cold. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words caught in her throat. Draze's eyes bored into her, as if he could see through her skin, see the flicker of light that pulsed beneath her translucent veins. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, her voice unsteady. Draze's smile didn't falter, but something dark flickered in his gaze. He straightened up and shrugged. "Maybe not. But if there's something you're not telling me, Mara, you should know you can trust me. We're family. I take care of my own." Mara nodded, but inside she was shaking. Draze was testing her, pushing her to reveal something, though she didn't know how much he suspected. She couldn't trust him. Not with this. If he found out about her powers, he would never let her go. A glimmer of hope. As the weeks passed, Mara's powers continued to evolve, and she practiced in secret. Late at night, when the others were asleep, she would slip out of the warehouse and find a quiet corner of the city where she could be alone. There, she would experiment with her phasing ability, trying to control it, to understand how it worked. The first few times, it had been purely instinctual, triggered by fear or desperation. But now, she was learning how to summon the power at will. It was tied to her emotions, that much was clear. When she was calm, She could feel the energy beneath her skin, a soft hum that connected her to the world around her. But when she was scared or angry, the energy surged, like a fire threatening to consume her. She had to learn to control it, to harness it before it consumed her entirely. One night, while practicing in an alleyway, Mara felt something shift inside her. She focused, her breath steady, and as she reached out with her mind, she felt herself slip through the fabric of reality. It was different this time. Instead of simply phasing through a wall, she felt the particles around her bend, twisting in response to her will. The air shimmered, and for a moment the world seemed to ripple around her, as if reality itself was bending to her command. Her heart raced as the shimmering energy faded, leaving her breathless. What was this power? It was more than just phasing, there was something deeper, something ancient stirring within her. The legends of her people whispered in the back of her mind, stories of the Ilhari's connection to the stars, to the fabric of the universe itself. But those were just stories, weren't they? Mara wiped the sweat from her brow, her mind buzzing with questions. She couldn't stay here forever, under Draze's control. She needed to understand what was happening to her. And more than that, she needed to find a way out. But where would she go? The galaxy was vast, and she had no one. No one except. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice, low and menacing, from the shadows. "Thought I'd find you here." Mara spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Draze stepped out of the darkness, his eyes gleaming in the dim light of the alley. He had been watching her. "I knew you were hiding something," Draze said, his voice dangerously soft. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You've got power, Mara, real power, and I want it." Mara backed away, her hands trembling. I don't know what you're talking about." Draze's smile was cold. "Don't play dumb with me. I've seen what you can do. And now you're going to show me." Fear surged through Mara's veins, but with it came the familiar warmth of her power. She could feel it building inside her, flickering just beneath the surface, ready to be unleashed. But before she could act, Draze lunged. Mara's instincts took over. In a flash she phased, her body flickering out of existence just as Draze's hand reached for her. She reappeared several feet away, her chest heaving, her heart racing. Draze's eyes widened in shock, but only for a moment. Then his expression twisted into something darker. "So it's true," he breathed, his voice filled with a mix of awe and greed. "You're more valuable than I thought." Mara's pulse quickened. She couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Without another word, she turned and ran, her body flickering in and out of phase as she darted through the alleyways, her mind racing. She had to get away. She had to leave the city, leave Arindor. Draze would never stop hunting her now. He had seen her power, and he would use her if he caught her. But where could she go? The meeting. As she ran through the mist-covered streets, Mara's thoughts spun wildly. She needed a plan, a way out, but she had nowhere to turn. Her feet carried her instinctively toward the one place that had always offered her a small measure of comfort, the marketplace. The same place where her powers had first manifested. It was late, and the market was nearly empty, the stalls closed for the night, but the familiar scents and sounds grounded her, if only for a moment. She slowed her pace, trying to calm her racing heart, when a voice called out from the shadows. "Running from someone, aren't you?" Mara froze, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stepped out from behind one of the market stalls, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a worn, rugged look about him. His clothes were simple, travel-worn, and his face was lined with the marks of a life spent in the stars. But his eyes. They were sharp, watchful, and oddly kind. "Who are you?" Mara asked, her voice trembling. The man smiled faintly, though there was a seriousness in his expression. "Name's Michael. And if you're smart, you'll come with me before whoever you're running from finds you." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Why would I trust you?" Michael shrugged, glancing around the empty market. "You don't have to. But I've been in your shoes before. I know what it's like to run. And I can give you a way out." Mara hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't know this man, but something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, made her want to believe him. He wasn't like Draze. His offer felt genuine. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like years, Mara saw something she had almost forgotten existed: kindness. "Nothing," he said. "Just a chance for you to start over, somewhere far away from here." Mara's heart pounded in her chest. She had nothing left to lose. "All right," she whispered. "I'll come with you." And just like that, Mara stepped into the unknown once again. But this time she wasn't running alone. This time she had a chance to escape her gilded cage. The stars stretched out like an endless sea of diamonds against the velvet blackness of space. From the cockpit of the horizon they seemed so close, Mara thought she could almost reach out and pluck them from the sky. But she knew better. The stars were always distant, always out of reach, just like the life she had left behind on Arendor. As the ship hummed quietly beneath her, Mara sat in the co-pilot's seat, her hands resting on her lap, her fingers tracing the smooth leather. The cockpit was small, yet there was a sense of comfort in its simplicity, the steady pulse of the ship's systems like a heartbeat surrounding her. It was a strange feeling, being aboard the horizon. The cold, harsh world she had known for so long seemed light years away, as if it were part of a different life entirely. Beside her, Michael adjusted the controls with practiced ease, his eyes focused on the navigation panel. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of the instrument lights, revealing the lines of experience etched into his weathered features. He had the look of someone who had seen too much, who had lived through battles both physical and emotional but had come out the other side intact. There was strength in him, a quiet resilience that Mara found reassuring. "You ever been off-world before?" Michael asked, not taking his eyes off the stars. Mara shook her head. "No, my parents. They traveled a lot, but I never went with them." Michael nodded, as if he had expected her answer. "The galaxy's a big place," he said quietly. "Bigger than most people realize. Easy to get lost in it. Easier to lose yourself if you're not careful." Mara glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Is that what you're doing? Getting lost?" Michael chuckled, a low, rough sound that filled the small cockpit. "Maybe. Sometimes that's the best way to stay free." Mara didn't respond, but his words lingered in the back of her mind. She had spent so long running from drays, from the streets, from the life that had been forced upon her. Now here she was, hurtling through space aboard a ship with a man she barely knew, running yet again. But was she really free? Or was she simply trading one cage for another? A new routine. Days aboard the horizon began to blur together, each one marked by the quiet hum of the ship's engines, the soft beeping of the navigation systems, and the steady pulse of the stars beyond the viewport. Michael kept mostly to himself, tending to the ship and occasionally running small trade routes between distant outposts. He wasn't just a simple merchant, Mara had quickly realized. There was more to him, something unspoken, something deeper. But he never pressed her with questions, and for that, she was grateful. In the quiet moments, when Michael was busy with ship maintenance or bartering with traders on some dusty spaceport, Mara found herself alone with her thoughts and with her powers. At first she tried to ignore them, to push them aside as if they were just a strange anomaly, a one-time occurrence. But she couldn't deny what was happening. The more time passed, the more she could feel the energy inside her growing, like a fire just beneath her skin. It flickered and danced whenever her emotions surged, whenever her fear or frustration bubbled to the surface, and each time it became harder to control. It started with small things. Objects would flicker, shifting slightly out of place as she passed by them. Her hands would glow faintly when she was upset, the light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. And sometimes when she wasn't paying attention, she would phase her body, slipping through solid matter like a shadow passing through light. It terrified her. The power felt alive, as if it had a will of its own, as if it were connected to something far greater than she could comprehend. One afternoon, while Michael was busy in the engine room, Mara stood in the cargo hold, her hands trembling as she stared at the metal wall in front of her. She had been practicing phasing in and out of the bulkhead, trying to understand how her abilities worked. Each time she phased, it felt like stepping into another world, a place where time and space blurred, where the lines between reality and illusion became indistinguishable. She took a deep breath, focusing on the sensation of the energy beneath her skin. Slowly, she reached out, her fingertips brushing against the cold metal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a flicker of light, her hand slipped through the wall, disappearing into the solid surface as if it were made of mist. Mara gasped, pulling her hand back instinctively. The wall shimmered, and her hand reappeared, whole and unharmed. She stared at it, her heart racing, her breath coming in short, rapid bursts. "What are you doing?" Mara spun around, her eyes wide. Michael stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. Mara stammered, unsure of how to explain. She had never told Michael about her powers, not directly. She had been too afraid. But now, there was no hiding it. Michael sighed and stepped into the cargo hold, his boots clanging softly against the metal floor. "You don't have to hide it, you know. I've seen things out there, things that would make your head spin. Whatever this is, it doesn't scare me." Mara swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I don't understand it," she admitted. "It just happens. I can't control it." Michael studied her for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. Then, he nodded. "It's not just going to go away. If you don't learn to control it, it'll control you." Mara's stomach twisted. She knew he was right. The power had been growing stronger each day, and the more she used it, the more it felt like it was becoming a part of her, like it was waking up something ancient and dangerous deep inside. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But I've heard stories about your people, the Ilhari. There are legends, myths about their connection to the stars, to the universe itself. Powers that can bend reality, shift time and space. Most people don't believe them, but then again, most people haven't seen what I've seen." Mara stared at him, her mind racing. The legends. Her parents had told her those stories when she was little, before they had left on their final voyage. Stories of the Ilhari's ancient past, of a time when they had wielded powers beyond imagination. But those were just bedtime tales, weren't they? "I don't want this," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask for it." Michael's expression softened, and for the first time he looked at her not as a stranger, but as someone who understood. Sometimes we don't get a choice in what life throws at us, but we do get to choose how we deal with it. Mara blinked back the sudden sting of tears. She hated feeling this way, so out of control, so powerless even in the face of something that gave her power. She wanted to scream, to break free of whatever invisible force was pulling her deeper into the unknown. "Come with me," Michael said, breaking the silence. "I'll show you something." The lesson of the stars. Michael led Mara up to the ship's observation deck, a small, circular room with transparent walls that offered an unobstructed view of the cosmos. The stars stretched out before them, brilliant and endless, their light shimmering like 1,000 tiny beacons in the darkness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, staring out at the stars, the silence between them filled with the quiet hum of the ship and the distant pulse of the universe. "When I was younger," Michael said finally, his voice soft, "I used to think the stars held all the answers, that if I could just reach them, I'd find something that would make everything make sense." Mara glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "And did you?" Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, the stars don't give you answers, but they do give you perspective. Out there, in the vastness of space, you realize just how small you are, how small all of this is, and sometimes that's enough." Mara looked back at the stars, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she didn't understand. She felt so small, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But at the same time, there was a strange comfort in that. The universe was vast, and she was just one small piece of it, one small piece of something much larger. "Your powers," Michael continued, his voice steady, "they're a part of you, Mara. You can't run from them, you can't hide from them, but you can learn to control them. And when you do, you'll realize that they don't define you, you define them." Mara swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to believe him, but the fear still gnawed at her. The fear that her powers would spiral out of control, that they would consume her and turn her into something she didn't recognize. "How do I control them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the stars, one step at a time. The outpost. Days passed, and Mara began to settle into life aboard the Horizon. She practiced her powers in secret when she could, trying to follow Michael's advice to control them, rather than let them control her. It was slow, frustrating work, but she could feel herself growing more confident with each passing day. The energy no longer felt like a wild, untamable force. It was becoming something she could guide, something she could shape. But But even as she gained control over her abilities, a sense of unease lingered in the back of her mind. Draze was still out there somewhere. She knew he wouldn't stop looking for her. And the more she used her powers, the more she feared that others might come looking for her, two people far more dangerous than Draze. One day, as they approached a small, remote outpost on the edge of a nebula, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The outpost was a bustling place, a hub for traders, smugglers, and mercenaries, and it was the kind of place where secrets were traded as easily as credits. Michael docked the ship, and they disembarked into the crowded market, the air thick with the scent of exotic spices and the hum of conversation. Mara stayed close to Michael, her eyes scanning the crowd, her instincts on high alert. Something about this place felt off. As they moved through the market, Michael bartered with a few traders, exchanging goods for supplies. Mara wandered a short distance away, her gaze drawn to the strange and curious items on display, jewels from distant star systems, strange alien artifacts, and weapons of all shapes and sizes. She felt a pang of familiarity, the sights reminding her of the life she had once lived on the streets of Arendor, stealing what she could to survive. But then she felt that cold, familiar sensation creeping up her spine. Her heart raced as she turned, her eyes scanning the crowd. At first she didn't see anything unusual, just the normal hustle and bustle of the market. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a figure standing in the shadow of a towering cargo freighter. Draze. He was watching her. Mara's blood ran cold. How had he found her? Had he been tracking Michael's ship this whole time? Her mind raced with questions, but there was no time for answers. Draze's eyes locked onto hers, and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He began to move toward her, his posture casual but menacing. "Mara," he called out, his voice smooth, laced with false warmth. "You've been hiding from us. That's not very nice." Panic surged through Mara's veins. She turned to flee, her legs ready to bolt, but Draze was faster than she remembered. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance between them, his hand shooting out and grabbing her wrist with a vice-like grip. "You owe me," Mara, Draze hissed, pulling her closer. "You think you can just disappear? We took you in, gave you food, protection, and now you're going to repay that debt." Mara's heart pounded in her chest, fear threatening to overwhelm her. She could feel her powers rising, the familiar warmth in her hands as her body flickered, ready to phase. But she was terrified, and in her fear, her powers faltered, sputtering like a candle in the wind. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Let her go." Michael's voice. Mara looked up, her eyes widening in relief. Michael stood at the edge of the market, his hand resting on the blaster strapped to his hip. His face was calm, but his eyes blazed with determination. Draze sneered, but he didn't release his grip on Mara. "This doesn't concern you, old man. She's mine." Michael took a step forward, his voice cold and steady. "You're not going to touch her again. Let her go, or you'll regret it." For a moment the air between them crackled with tension. Draze's gang members, lurking nearby, shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Michael and Mara. Draze looked furious, his face twisted with anger, but after a long pause, he raised his hands in mock surrender, his grip on Mara loosening. "Fine," Draze spat. "Have it your way. But this isn't over, Mara. You owe me, and I'll be back to collect." With a final sneer, Draze turned and stalked off, his gang following close behind. Mara's body trembled as the adrenaline began to fade, her legs weak beneath her. Michael walked over to her, his expression softening. "You all right?" Mara nodded, though her heart was still pounding in her chest. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "No," Michael said grimly. "But we won't let him hurt you." They quickly returned to the horizon, leaving the outpost behind as they lifted off into the safety of space. But even as the stars stretched out before them, Mara couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her like a shadow. Draze wouldn't stop. He would keep coming for her, no matter how far she ran. And worse, Mara knew now that her powers, her connection to something ancient and powerful, would draw others far more dangerous than Draze. She stared out at the stars, her heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. The galaxy was vast, and her journey was only beginning. But even as the darkness loomed ahead, Mara clung to the small spark of hope that had begun to grow within her. She wasn't running anymore. She was learning to fight. The days passed aboard the horizon, the stars whirling endlessly outside the viewport like silent watchers of a galaxy that never slept. The ship hummed with its usual rhythm, steady and reassuring, but Mara could feel the tension building within herself. Draze's parting words from the outpost echoed in her mind. This isn't over. She knew they hadn't seen the last of him. Michael remained calm, as he always did, his steady presence a constant source of reassurance for Mara, but there was something different about the way he carried himself now, a quiet vigilance that hadn't been there before. He didn't say it aloud, but Mara could sense he was preparing for Draze's inevitable return. He double-checked their security protocols, upgraded the ship's defensive systems, and took routes through more obscure star systems, ones that kept them away from busy trade lanes. Mara appreciated his efforts, but she couldn't escape the growing feeling of dread. She had begun to understand her powers more, and with each day they felt stronger. She could phase through walls with ease now, passing through the solid metal of the horizon as though it were made of smoke. She had even begun to manipulate the particles around her, creating brief illusions that flickered in the air like mirages, but her abilities still frightened her. Every time she tapped into that strange, otherworldly energy, it felt like she was reaching into something far deeper than herself, like pulling on a thread that could unravel the universe if she wasn't careful. And that was what scared her the most. She didn't want to lose control. She didn't want to become a danger to Michael or to herself. Yet deep down, Mara knew that Draze would force her to confront those fears sooner than she wanted. The calm before the storm. It was during one of these quiet days, while the horizon drifted in the shadow of a nebula, that Mara found herself standing in the observation deck, staring out at the swirling mass of colors outside the ship. The nebula was breathtaking, a vibrant cloud of purples, blues, and greens that shimmered like a cosmic storm frozen in time. But as beautiful as it was, Mara felt uneasy. She had been restless since their encounter with Draze. The brief moments of peace she had found aboard the ship were tainted by the constant fear that he would reappear, that he would somehow find a way to track them down. Michael assured her that they were safe for the time being, that Draze didn't have the resources to follow them across the galaxy. But Mara wasn't so sure. Draze was resourceful. He had a way of worming himself into places he didn't belong. She leaned against the glass, her reflection staring back at her. Her silver hair, once neatly kept, now fell loosely around her face, and her glowing eyes shimmered faintly in the dim light. She looked different, older, maybe. The weight of the past few months had changed her in ways she didn't fully understand. Mara, Michael's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, a faint smile on his lips. He was dressed in his usual worn jacket and boots, his face showing signs of exhaustion, but his eyes were alert. "You've been up here for a while," he said, stepping closer. "Everything okay?" Mara nodded, though her heart was heavy, just thinking about Draze. She hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I can't help it. I know he's out there, and I know he won't stop. He's not the type to give up." Michael exhaled softly, running a hand through his hair. "You're right about that. He's persistent. But we've kept a low profile. It'll be hard for him to track us, especially with the routes I've been taking." "I know," Mara said, her voice quiet. "But it's not just Draze that worries me. It's everything. My powers, what's happening to me. I feel like it's getting stronger. And I don't know if I can control it." Michael stepped forward, his expression softening. "You're stronger than you think, Mara. I've seen what you can do and I know you can handle it. But I also know it's not easy. Power like that, it's not something you just figure out overnight. It takes time." "I don't know if I have time," Mara whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. "What if I lose control? What if I hurt someone?" Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You won't. I won't let that happen." "And you won't either." Mara wanted to believe him, but the fear still gnawed at her. The visions she had been having, dreams of something ancient, something vast, haunted her every night. It felt like a warning, a sign that her powers were connected to something far greater than she could comprehend. Before she could voice her concerns, the ship's systems suddenly flared to life, the soft hum of the engines shifting into a low, urgent whine. Red lights flickered across the control panels, and a sharp alarm pierced the air. Michael's face hardened instantly, his hand dropping from Mara's shoulder as he turned toward the door. "We've got company." The return of Drays. Mara followed Michael to the cockpit, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel that something was wrong. The ship's sensors were lighting up with multiple signals, and as Michael settled into the pilot's seat, his expression grew grim. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. "Looks like Drays found us after all." Mara's stomach twisted as she peered at the screen. Several ships were closing in on them, their signatures unfamiliar but unmistakably hostile. They were fast, too fast for simple smugglers or bounty hunters. This was something more organized, more dangerous. "How did they find us?" Mara asked, her voice tight with fear. "Doesn't matter now," Michael replied, his fingers flying over the controls as he prepared the ship for evasive maneuvers. "What matters is getting out of here before they board us." Mara's heart raced as the horizon veered sharply to the left, the stars outside blurring as the ship accelerated. But the enemy ships were faster. They closed the distance quickly, and before Mara could react, the ship shuddered violently as a blast rocked the hull. "We're hit," Michael shouted, his voice strained. "Shields are holding, but we won't last long if they keep this up." Another blast rocked the ship, and Mara gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white, her mind raced, panic surging through her veins. Drays had found them, and now they were trapped. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Michael's jaw tightened as he adjusted the controls. "I'll try to outrun them, but if we can't—" Before he could finish, a voice crackled over the ship's comm system. It was a voice Mara hadn't heard in weeks, but one she would never forget. Mara Drays' voice drawled, smooth and dripping with menace. "You didn't think you could run forever, did you?" Mara's blood ran cold as Drays' voice echoed through the cockpit. She could hear the smug satisfaction in his tone, the certainty that he had finally cornered her. "You're not getting away this time," Drays continued. "I've got you right where I want you, and we both know how this ends." Michael's hand hovered over the comm controls, his expression dark. "You don't have to listen to him, Mara. We'll get out of this." But Mara knew Drays too well. He wasn't bluffing. He had them trapped, and he wasn't going to let her go, not this time. The boarded horizon. The next blast hit harder than the previous ones, and the horizon lurched violently to the side. The warning lights on the console flashed red, and a sharp beeping filled the cockpit as the ship's shields began to fail. "They're boarding us," Michael said, his voice tense. "Prepare yourself." Mara's heart pounded in her chest as she followed Michael's lead. He handed her a small blaster, but she could barely grip it with her trembling hands. The weight of it felt foreign, wrong. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't like Michael, hardened by years of experience. And yet, here she was, facing the one person she had tried so desperately to escape. The ship shuddered again as the enemy vessels latched onto the horizon, and Mara could hear the telltale hiss of airlocks being breached. Footsteps echoed through the narrow corridors, heavy boots thudding against the metal floor. They were coming. "Mara," Michael said, his voice steady but urgent. "Stay close to me. We'll make our stand here." Mara nodded, her pulse racing. The air felt thick, heavy with the tension of what was about to happen. She could feel her powers stirring beneath the surface, the familiar warmth spreading through her veins. But she was afraid to use them. What if she lost control? What if she made things worse? Before she could dwell on those thoughts, the door to the cockpit slid open with a sharp hiss, and Drays stepped inside. He looked different than Mara remembered. His face was harder, more angular, his eyes sharper and colder. He wore a sleek black jacket, and his movements were smooth, confident, like a predator stalking its prey. Well, Drays said, his voice smooth as silk. "Look what we have here." The dark void of space stretched endlessly before them, a silent expanse punctuated only by distant stars flickering like faint, dying embers. The horizon drifted quietly through it all, an insignificant speck against the vastness of the galaxy. But within its metal walls, a storm was brewing, one that threatened to unravel everything Mara had come to understand about herself. It had been several days since Drays had boarded the horizon, his final words still ringing in Mara's ears. This isn't over, though they had managed to escape him. The encounter had left a scar, a reminder that Mara's past was not something she could easily leave behind. Drays would be back. And next time he wouldn't be alone. But as the horizon traveled through the quiet star systems, something else had shifted. Mara could feel it deep within her. The power that had surged during the confrontation had not subsided. It was growing, waking up, and the more she used it, the more it seemed to demand from her. Sitting in the quiet of the cargo hold, Mara stared at her hands, watching as faint tendrils of light flickered across her translucent skin. The energy hummed beneath the surface, alive and waiting. It felt like a pulse, rhythmic and steady, calling her to do something she couldn't yet name. But every time she touched it, reached for it, the power seemed to pull her closer to the edge of something vast and terrifying. A void as endless as the space outside the ship, and she didn't know if she could pull herself back. Practicing again. Mara jumped slightly at the sound of Michael's voice. She hadn't heard him enter the cargo hold. His footsteps were quiet, his presence steady as he leaned against the doorway, watching her with that same calm intensity he always did. "You keep sneaking up on me," Mara said, a small smile tugging at her lips, though her hand still trembled slightly from the power she had been trying to control. Michael chuckled, stepping further into the room. "Not sneaking, just keeping an eye on you." Mara exhaled softly, the smile fading. "I don't know what I'm doing, Michael. I try to control it, but it feels like it's getting stronger, more unpredictable." Michael studied her for a long moment before sitting down across from her on one of the metal crates, his gaze thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that," he said, his voice quiet. "And I think it's time we stop running." Mara blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Michael leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "We've been trying to stay hidden and stay off the radar, but it's not working. Dre's found us, and others will too. You're connected to something, Mara, something bigger than either of us, and hiding from it isn't going to help you control it." Mara's heart raced at his words, fear creeping into her chest. "You think we should, what, go after them?" "No," Michael said, shaking his head. "I think we need to find out what's really going on with your powers. The visions, the energy, it's all pointing to something. And until you understand it, you're going to be fighting blind." Mara swallowed hard. He was right. As much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep pretending that her powers were just a fluke, something she could ignore. They were a part of her, whether she liked it or not. "But where do we start?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael hesitated for a moment before answering. "There's a place, a planet, deep in the outer systems. It's a long shot, but I've heard rumor stories about the Ilhari people and the ancient power they once held. If there's any place in the galaxy where we might find answers, it's there." Mara's mind raced. A planet. A place that might hold the key to understanding her abilities. The idea filled her with equal parts hope and dread. What if they didn't find anything? Or worse, what if they did? Still, what choice did she have? She couldn't keep drifting through the galaxy without answers, without control. If she didn't confront this power, it would consume her. "Okay," Mara said finally, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Let's go." The Forgotten Planet. The journey to the planet took several days, and as the horizon sped through the quieter, more desolate systems of the galaxy, Mara found herself on edge. She tried to keep herself busy, practicing her powers in small, controlled bursts, phasing through walls, manipulating objects with brief flashes of energy. But every time she touched that power, she could feel it tugging at her, pulling her closer to something she couldn't fully understand. Michael, as always, remained calm. He guided the ship with a quiet determination, his eyes focused on the stars ahead. But Mara could tell that even he was tense. This planet, this place they were headed, was a mystery to him as well. It was a forgotten world, lost to the galaxy's fringes, abandoned by time and memory. The stories Michael had heard were little more than rumors, whispers traded between travelers and smugglers in shadowed spaceports. But the name of the planet, the Ilhara Nexus, had come up too many times to ignore. The Ilhari people were believed to have once inhabited this place, long before their civilization spread to the rest of the galaxy. It was said to be the birthplace of their powers, the nexus of energy that connected them to the stars. But no one had set foot on Ilhara in centuries, if not millennia. It was a place lost to history, a ghost world. When the horizon finally dropped out of hyperspace, the planet loomed before them, a cold, desolate sphere hanging in the void. Its surface was covered in jagged mountains and craters, with patches of dark, swirling clouds that obscured much of the land below. There were no signs of life, no cities or structures visible from space, just an empty, barren wasteland. But as they descended into the atmosphere, Mara felt something deep and ancient stirring beneath the surface. It was faint, like the echo of a distant heartbeat, but it resonated with the energy inside her, pulling her closer. "We're here," Michael said, his voice low as he guided the ship toward a flat stretch of land near one of the planet's jagged mountain ranges. "Keep your eyes open. I don't know what we'll find down there." Mara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what awaited them on the surface, but the pull of the energy was undeniable. It was like the planet itself was calling to her. The Temple of Light. As the horizon touched down on the planet's surface, Mara could feel the weight of the place pressing down on her. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ancient stone and dust. The sky above was dark, the swirling clouds blocking out the faint light of the distant stars. But there was a stillness here, a silence that felt almost sacred. Together, she and Michael stepped out onto the barren ground, the cold air biting at their skin. The landscape was jagged and unforgiving, with towering cliffs and deep ravines that seemed to stretch on forever. But in the distance, at the base of the mountains, Mara could see something, a faint glow, barely visible through the haze of the atmosphere. "What is that?" she asked, her voice hushed